We've got a super chat from Lars Hansen, who says, has WoW not gradually become an esports game with a thin MMO surface? And I mean, that's pretty big. It's a pretty big topic.
Ooh.
And it's one we have covered before, so I don't think it's the time to go mega deep, but we can see if we can get some new angles on this situation. And I mean, I essentially agree.
So do I.
Not even essentially. I entirely agree. World of Warcraft, the MMO bit's getting smaller and smaller, and the, esports is one way of putting it, but it's also, like, gameplay driven, performance driven.
Yeah, I think that's the way to admit it more.
Yeah. The way that me and Matt have always sort of talked about this to each other is like the Destiny-ification of WoW, where it's like very much about like, doing your weekly instance content, and that really is the core of the game. So it is an interesting thing. It's like, could you say that the MDI is ruining dungeons? I actually did once, when I was just chatting in, I was like chatting in Guild. And what I meant when I said that, and, I don't actually think it like that, but it's like, if every single dungeon has to be something that supports MDI style gameplay, then you cannot have Ubers anymore without it being a weird different thing. So our new mega dungeons, they're in as a mega dungeon. But it's like, does that mega dungeon eventually, having to be sliced into and turned into 2 Mythic Plus dungeons, does that impact the design? Does it impact the pacing? Do you have moments for like RP and, cool, flavorful shit that can happen in a dungeon that is maybe less of a thing these days? So there's a bunch of questions like that. There's then also, I think, the other side of it, and this is maybe the one that we haven't touched on as much, but you think about World of Warcraft's development resources, a lot of it obviously goes towards dungeons. I mean, the amount of dungeon changes, they've been hotfixing in so many of them recently, and it has been really good for the M+ community, seeing Blizzard, like, refine and iterate and things, and that has been really sweet. But you do wonder, are there other things that could be in the game? Other things they could be focusing on that are not necessarily the super gameplay driven, on a time trial, etc. content?
Yeah, it's a case, if you think about it from like the pure like design playground perspective, there's always the case that if you're designing within certain bounds as a designer, you're kind of more, you can be more targeted, you can be a little bit like better within those bounds, but it completely cuts everything else out. It's like, it's not even a case of, what was the last dungeon that was longer than like 20-30 minutes? What was the last dungeon that really was super special? I mean, I think Court of Stars aside, which had tried some new stuff.
Yeah.
There wasn't really anything like too major. Even like Grimriel Depot was like, it was a very cool dungeon being on a train, etc., etc. But I think that still technically could have been close to Mythic Dungeon. But I guess the problem is that even when it comes to mega dungeons, they have this problem where they'll still have to split it up, so it'll have to be 2 or 3 Mythic Plus, well, I guess 2 Mythic Plusable segments, whereas all of the possibility outside of the bounds of dungeons is completely gone. Like, there's no way they'll go, like, they can't justify sitting down and going, right, okay, well, what if we do something super, super big? Like, can we absolutely break the entire boundary of what's considered a dungeon? Can we be massively creative in how we handle boss fights? They can't do that all anymore because it all has to fit within the thing. It's like, even like saying like UBRS as an example, with the rework they kind of solved that back in a little bit in WoD, but it's still like, it was big, but it wasn't even like super, super amazing. It was a big journey and all that, same with like the massive size of BRD, but like, there's so much potential that we can't imagine, because we haven't had to imagine it, that we'll just kind of, we can't possibly get that anymore because of this, which I think is a lot of the esports problem, where it's all this gameplay driven stuff fit in within a box that players can expect, whereas a lot of the aspect of what if, the what if is gone.
And this is where I'm going to hit you with a bit of a what if, or a bit of a situation that I think is going on, because when anything is being designed, you got to think about all the bits in your toolbox. If you're making a dungeon, and that's a Mythic Plus dungeon, You know, it could be tyrannical or it could be, you know, whatever, right? You got your affixes. Now, that means that you can't just... You can't just, like, get a cool segment, put a bunch of mobs in it in a way that, you know, you just think, oh yeah, that looks cool, that'd be fun. Done. You can't, you obviously, I mean, I'm not saying this with any experience, I've never made a Mythic Dungeon, but think about the people at Blizzard who are making a Mythic Dungeon, right? Every time they place a pack, they've got to think, well, what is this pack like in the overall, you know, the routing of this dungeon, the pool? How do these packs and these mobs interact with these various different, you know, mechanics, you know, the affixes and stuff? Now, surely that makes it really quite hard to make a dungeon, doesn't it?
Yeah, you have to think about all of the potential, and sometimes even potential you don't know is there yet. Because I'm thinking, like, if we think about like the season 3 affix, so that is, they can't do anything super interesting that's way against the rules of mob design, because if that has an impact with like a planned affix, they're kind of gonna, maybe they won't, like, they could make an exception possibly, but it's more likely to go, it's not worth it, it's not worth the bother. I'll just keep it simple, I'll keep it plain, which means every dungeon's going to feel like you've got packs that are designed for, an MDT writer to pick out from,
Yeah.
and stuff like that, instead of like a massive gigantic pack that's going to be unkillable anything higher or anything like super unique. It's just, I'm trying to think of I can never remember the name of it, but that recent one, the new swirly whirlwind, melee can go die in a pit.
Oh,
one.
yeah.
That one, like, that means that you have to be super careful every time you put a spinny or like a melee focused thing, or even any ground targeting, because even when they do, it just feels terrible.
Yeah, it's going to be limiting design. So
Yeah.
it's a sort of thing, for one segment of the player base, this is all really good. This is intricate, engaging game design where, you know, those different combos of affixes, it means that you're now thinking about a route. You know, you're looking at the tier list of this week, and you're doing all of those things. There's another group of people who are just like, I don't care about any of that. I'm here to do a dungeon. Just like, you know, I do dungeons and I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends. I did dungeons in old games where dungeons were a bit more old school. This WoW thing is no longer a dungeon for me. So for those people, it's going to be a difference. I think that's why personally, like, the idea of a new mega dungeon that has hard modes is so incredibly exciting. Because I guess those hard modes are, I mean, not a thing active in M+ or whatever, right? Because that's...
No.
That's what's extremely exciting for me about a new mega dungeon. That's actually almost the prime thing I'm really hyped about for the next big patch. Is that, and it's because for me it's just that promise of totally, you know, there's a new setting, there's going to be more creativity, more, you know, wackiness, more uniqueness with each boss because it's going to have its own hard mode in that dungeon. Whereas those are things that maybe will not work with all the different affixes and stuff.
Yeah, so it's a case of, imagine, like, you could think, okay, they can put the hard modes in because it's a big mythic mega dungeon that won't be a Mythic Plus for like a patch or so. It's going to be it's set in a way where people will have to be like decently geared and experienced with their class to actually play it, as opposed to having to scale down to normal where people will just be like, yeah, whatever. It's a complete breeze. So it's like, imagine that but extrapolate it out further. They can make a mega dungeon that ultimately has to fit into a Mythic Plus like a patch later. They can just turn off hard modes, but imagine what that dungeon would look like if it never had to become a Mythic Plus dungeon.
That's it.
If the hard modes could be like not necessarily baked in, because then, you know, you'd want them to be optional, but the possibility of them throwing wild curveballs, especially in something as insane as the Broker City, like the complete nonsense you get up to there would be really fun. I think even stuff like. There's definitely a way this could fit into Mythic Dungeons, but I'm imagining kind of Hearthstone stuff. Whenever, like, if we're going in the dungeon, I believe, from the press kit, we're going to Azeroth to get like some artifacts and stuff.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, so I'm thinking the Hearthstone artifacts where they just do crazy unbalanced broken shit, and they probably wouldn't let that fly in a Mythic dungeon because, you know, you go to, not to blame the MDI because they do try to balance all of the Mythic dungeons regardless of the MDI, but it's a case where if you had a random artifact that could just like make the rest of the dungeon a breeze, or even a hard mode artifact that would make it like a nightmare by randomly polymorphing you while you held it, stuff like that wouldn't really fly in a Mythic setting, or in a Mythic Plus setting, but it would be a really fun experience. And that all the possibility there's kind of dead.
Yeah, so it's really hard to tie this one in a bow. For me, it would just come down to, we gotta let M plus be what M plus is. We gotta let rating and let them be what they are. I think the best way to respond to it is to simplify the things around the gameplay, and then for the effort to go elsewhere. Yeah. Because the other part of this question, this is a two-pronged question in a way, where Lars was talking about not just the esportsy elements, and maybe, you know, if you see a lot of effort go into those esportsy feeling things and that's not something you want to do, you're obviously going to feel like, oh, well, they're not focusing a bit that I like. So I think the thing to do is not to take anything away from those M plus players, because in many cases they're having a great time and the system has been a big success in many ways. Instead, I think it's make the MMO bit less thin, as Lars says. And as to what that is, I mean, there's the usual suspects of player housing, more customizations, and various different things like that. There is more professions. We'll get into professions in a second because somebody did have a question on them.
Ooh, nice.
It is armor tinting. It is more armor customization. It is old school reputations. I've done that shtick multiple times on this stream. I'm not going to do it again. You can go to our clips channel if you want to see that. I think it's coming out in the next few days, that clip from the stream. It's those things. It's basically World of Warcraft being like, cool, we actually get hundreds of thousands of views on our MDI. We have all of these players having a great time in M+ and all that stuff. What's the next thing to focus on? And I think it's very simple. I think it basically is just things that make the RPG part of World of Warcraft better in a non-expansion specific basis. I think that is the most important thing to do. And then secondary to that is things like within an expansion having way, way, way better loot and stuff.
Yeah.
So that then
I mean, I'm going to put it in a very simple way. It's like, it kind of feels like a dichotomy. It's like, is WoW esports? Is it an RPG? And the very, like, the simple question, the simple answer beyond simple is, it can be both. it can just be both. You can totally have Mythic Plus, and you can totally have armor tinting. I mean, armor tinting, I went on a little journey in my own head there, thinking about the FF14 Glamours subreddit, where people just like, they go get the armor tinted correctly and go, oh, here's my rogue, which looks like this anime character, and you're like, nice. That's really cool, like, way of sort of self-expression and creativity within the game. So it's like, not even just armor tinting, but it's like that other stuff. Go for it. Just put it in the game.
It's probably Marvel characters for the more Western audience versus FF.
Yeah.
But I 100% agree.
Yeah. It's a case of, so you've got all of these devs working on this game and it's bringing in all this money. There's very little in the long term. In the short term is difficult. But in the long term, there's no real reason they don't go, okay, so we've got these devs over here. They're all looking for a job. Do you want to work on World of Warcraft? Yep. What do you want to can we have houses? Can we have, armor tinting? Can we have all other stuff? Can we have profession updates, please?
That actually does, just to finish off Lars's question, that does actually get me to a big thing. And that is kind of like the multiplier effect on dev time. So a thing that is relevant to the casual and collection-oriented player base is new things to do and collect, right? So you can have your devs make some new heritage armor. Cool. Go get your heritage armor. You're done. But that's just the thing you sort of get and you're done. Right? It's not really that multiplicative in terms of the dev time. Whereas sometimes if you build a big new fancy system, that can be highly multiplicative. Transmog is a big example of that. You make the system, and then via that system, players can create endless hours of their own fun. So that's where I would come in and say that instead of, all of this pussyfooting about, the restrictions of the transmog system, it would make a lot more sense to try to work out armor tinting systems and stuff like that, such that the toy box offered to players within their World of Warcraft subscription is a larger toy box that has more interesting toys instead of just more of the same toys. So for me, it's trying to get that the stuff where it's like, yeah, these dev hours, sure, it could just, you do your dev hours and then cool, a player can go spend a few hours, get the thing, and then they're done. Or maybe you could spend slightly more dev hours or a lot more dev hours, and that could create a cool new system that could be super transformative and could unleash an engine of creativity within the player base. I would maybe say that that's something we should think about. There's so many games like your Animal Crossings and a lot of those ones that are heavily based off the self-expression of the audience, which is what an MMO is. Right now, we kind of call them toons and we're very gameplay oriented. In the past, it was called your avatar for a reason, right? So that's capping off Lars's super chat. Lars, thank you for the super chat. Oh, take a big breath.